The light in the forest was wrong. That's the first thing I noticed when I stepped off the trail that October morning in 1997. A strange, pulsing blue glow coming from somewhere beyond the Douglas firs, flickering like a dying fluorescent bulb. I'd been a forest ranger for 15 years and had never seen anything like it. When I finally reached the source, I found something that would change everything I thought I knew about our place in the universe. My name is Bobby Whitaker. I'm 38 years old and I live in Packwood, Washington, a small town of about 1,000 people nestled at the base of Mount Rainier. I work as a forest ranger for the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, covering a vast territory that includes some of the most remote and beautiful wilderness in the Pacific Northwest. Packwood isn't much, just a main street with a general store, a diner called the Mountain Goat, a gas station, and a handful of houses scattered around the edges. Most people pass through on their way to the mountain or the ski areas, never staying long enough to really know the place. I've lived here my whole life, except for a brief stint in Seattle that didn't work out. Born and raised in a small house on the edge of town, the same house my parents had lived in, the same house I still occupied alone after my divorce 3 years ago. My ex-wife, Jennifer, had moved to Portland, saying she couldn't stand the isolation anymore, couldn't stand being married to a man who preferred spending nights in the wilderness to going to dinner parties or social gatherings. She wasn't wrong. I'd always been more comfortable with trees than people, more at ease with silence than small talk. After the divorce, I'd thrown myself even deeper into ranger work. Most weeks, I'd spend 4 or 5 nights in one of the remote ranger stations scattered throughout my territory, only coming back to Packwood for supplies and the occasional meal at the Mountain Goat, where Betty, the owner, would always ask how I was doing with that concerned look people get when they think you're too alone. I'd tell her I was fine, which was mostly true. The solitude never bothered me. If anything, it felt right. That morning, October 17th, 1997, started like any other Friday. I'd woken before dawn in my small house, made coffee in my Mr. Coffee machine while listening to the local news on my kitchen radio. Something about Princess Diana's funeral still being discussed, even though it had happened back in August. The world seemed obsessed with it, but out here in Packwood, life moved at its own pace, largely unaffected by events in distant cities. I'd driven my Forest Service pickup, a green 1993 Ford Ranger with the official shield on the door and almost 70,000 miles on the odometer, to the trailhead at Spirit Lake. The drive took about 40 minutes on winding mountain roads, passing through stands of old-growth forest that had stood for centuries. My assignment for the day was routine: check on some trail markers that needed replacing, assess winter damage on a few bridges, and generally make sure everything was ready for the handful of hikers who'd be coming through before the serious snow started. The air that morning was crisp, probably in the low 40s, and fog hung in the valleys like cotton batting. Perfect autumn weather for the Pacific Northwest. I'd packed my usual gear: a backpack with water, trail mix, a first aid kit, my Forest Service radio, a Motorola that was supposed to have a range of about 15 miles, but usually worked for about half that in these mountains. I also carried my Nikon camera for documenting any issues I found, and a Magellan GPS unit, one of those new handheld models that the Forest Service had started issuing, though half the time it couldn't get a signal through the tree cover anyway. I'd been hiking for about 45 minutes, following a well-maintained trail that wound through massive Douglas firs and western hemlocks when I saw it. The light. At first, I thought maybe someone had set up an illegal camp with some kind of lantern or a Coleman stove. We got that sometimes, people who didn't want to pay for campground permits and figured they could hide in the backcountry. But the color was all wrong. This wasn't the warm yellow-orange of a propane flame or the white beam of a flashlight. This was blue, electric blue, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost alive. And the location was odd, at least 2 miles from any established trail, in an area that was difficult to access even for experienced hikers. Whoever or whatever was making that light had gone significantly off the beaten path. I stopped and pulled out my radio. "Base, this is Whitaker. I'm about 2 miles northeast of Spirit Lake Trailhead, seeing some kind of unusual light source in the forest, approximately half a mile off trail. Going to investigate. Could be illegal campers." The radio crackled with static, then Sarah's voice came through. Sarah Martinez was the dispatcher at the main ranger station, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd been working for the Forest Service longer than I had. "Copy that, Whitaker. What kind of light are we talking about?" "Blue, pulsing. Don't recognize the source. Could be nothing, but it's in a weird location." "Keep your radio on. Check in every 15 minutes. "Will do." I clipped the radio back to my belt and left the trail, pushing through the undergrowth toward that strange glow. The forest here was dense, old growth mixed with newer trees, thick with sword ferns, salal bushes, and Oregon grape. The ground was covered in a thick layer of pine needles and decomposing leaves, still damp from recent rain. My boots made soft crunching sounds as I walked, and I could hear the distant call of a Steller's jay somewhere overhead. The light grew brighter as I approached, that pulsing rhythm becoming more pronounced, and there was something else, a smell, faint but distinctive, like ozone after a lightning strike, mixed with something metallic and something else I couldn't identify. The kind of smell that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up because your brain recognized it as wrong, as other, as not belonging in a Pacific Northwest forest. I moved carefully, using trees for cover more out of instinct than any real sense of danger. As I got closer, maybe 100 yards away, I could see the light was coming from a small clearing ahead. Through the trees, I caught glimpses of something metallic, something that reflected the light in ways that didn't make sense. My heart was pounding now, adrenaline starting to flow. In 15 years as a ranger, I'd seen a lot of strange things: illegal marijuana grows, homeless encampments, once even stumbled on what turned out to be a meth lab. But this felt different. This felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. I reached the edge of the clearing and stopped, my hand instinctively moving to my radio. Then I looked up, and my breath caught in my throat. There was a craft. I don't know what else to call it. Not a helicopter. I'd seen plenty of those. Knew what they looked like, even when crashed. Not a plane. I'd been part of search parties for downed small aircraft before. This was nothing I could identify from any human technology I'd ever seen or read about. It was maybe 15 feet across, roughly disc-shaped, but with organic curves that made it look almost grown rather than built. Like someone had sculpted it from a single piece of material rather than assembling it from parts. The surface was smooth, metallic, but not quite. It had a quality that was hard to describe, almost like it was both reflective and matte at the same time. It reflected the forest around it, but in a way that hurt my eyes to look at directly, like the reflections were coming from slightly the wrong angles, and it was damaged. A large section of the hull, if you could call it that, was cracked open. A jagged tear, maybe 3 feet long, running along what I assumed was the side. Dark scoring marks surrounded the damage, suggesting either impact trauma or some kind of malfunction that had burned through the hull material. The blue light was coming from inside, through that crack, pulsing weakly like a dying heartbeat. I stood there for a full minute, maybe longer, just staring. Every rational part of my brain was screaming that this couldn't be real, that I was hallucinating, that there had to be some explanation. Maybe I'd hit my head on a branch while hiking and was unconscious somewhere, dreaming this. Maybe the stress of the divorce and the isolation had finally caught up with me and I was having some kind of breakdown. But I've spent 15 years in these woods. I know the difference between real and imagined. I know what the forest feels like, sounds like, smells like. This was real. As impossible as it was, this was actually happening. I pulled out my radio, then hesitated. What would I say? Base, I found a UFO? Sarah would think I'd lost my mind. They'd probably send someone out to check on me, maybe recommend I take some time off. And if this was real, if this was actually what it appeared to be, did I want the Forest Service involved? Did I want the government involved? The military? I clipped the radio back without calling in. I could make that decision later. Right now, I needed to understand what I was looking at. I approached slowly, each step deliberate, my eyes scanning for any signs of danger. The craft, I couldn't think of another word for it, was partially embedded in the forest floor, like it had hit at an angle and skidded to a stop. There was a furrow in the ground behind it, torn earth and broken branches marking its impact path. The trees immediately around the clearing showed signs of intense heat, blackened bark, singed needles. But there was no fire, no smoke. Whatever had happened here had happened quickly and was already over. As I got closer, I heard something, a sound, faint, almost like breathing, but not quite. It had a mechanical quality to it, but also something organic, coming from inside the craft, through that crack in the hull. "Hello?" I called out, feeling absurd even as I did it. "Is someone in there? This is Bobby Whitaker, U.S. Forest Service. If you're hurt, I can help." The breathing sound changed, became more labored, more urgent. Then I heard movement, something shifting inside the damaged craft, metal, or maybe not metal, scraping against itself. I moved to the crack in the hull and peered inside, using my maglite to supplement the blue glow. The interior was like nothing I'd ever seen. Smooth, curved surfaces with no visible seams or bolts or welds or anything resembling human construction methods. Everything flowed together like it had been poured into a mold, or grown, or somehow manifested as a single piece. The blue light seemed to be coming from panels, or maybe they were organic structures, built into the walls, pulsing in that same irregular rhythm. And I could see frost forming on some of the interior surfaces, ice crystals growing in patterns that looked almost deliberate. And there, on what might have been a floor or might have been something else entirely, was a figure. Small, maybe 4.5 feet tall if it stood up. Thin, impossibly thin, with grayish skin that looked almost luminescent in the blue light. The proportions were all wrong for a human. Arms too long, legs too short, torso too narrow. The head was large, disproportionate to the body, oval-shaped with a narrow chin. And the eyes. Dear God, the eyes. Enormous, almond-shaped, completely black, no whites, no pupils that I could distinguish, just pure darkness that somehow still conveyed depth and awareness. An alien. An actual extraterrestrial being. It was lying on its side, one arm stretched out toward some kind of control panel or console that was dark, clearly not functioning. The being's chest moved shallowly, rapidly, like it was struggling to breathe or whatever equivalent of breathing it did. There was damage visible on the left side. Hard to tell if it was damage to a suit it was wearing or damage to its actual body, but the material or skin was torn, discolored. We stared at each other for several seconds that felt like hours. Those enormous black eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made me feel simultaneously exposed and understood. Then, impossibly, I heard a voice in my head. Not words exactly, not English or any language I could identify, but meaning that appeared directly in my consciousness, clear and unmistakable. "Help, please." "Jesus Christ," I breathed, taking an involuntary step back. You're real. You're actually real, yes, and injured. Vessel crashed. Systems failing. Life support compromised. Not much time remaining. The voice in my mind was weak, fading, like someone speaking from a great distance through static. I looked at the damaged craft, at the being lying there, at the frost forming on the walls, and made a decision that would define the rest of my life. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Okay, I'm going to get you out of there. My truck isn't far, maybe 1.5 miles. I can carry you, get you to..." I trailed off. Get it to where? A hospital in Packwood? The tiny clinic there was barely equipped to handle broken bones and flu symptoms. And how would I explain this? What would I say? Too late for extraction, too late for rescue. Hull breach, atmospheric contamination, thermal cascade. This form is ending. No, I said firmly, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. You're not dying. I've pulled injured hikers out of worse situations than this. We'll figure something out. Not. The same. This biology requires specific atmospheric composition, specific temperature range, specific pressure. Your world's conditions already causing cellular breakdown. I knew when impact happened, there would be no recovery, no rescue possible. The crack in the hull was narrow, but I managed to squeeze through, scraping my Forest Service jacket on the strange material. It felt neither hot nor cold to the touch, just neutral, despite the obvious trauma the craft had suffered. Inside, the temperature was wrong, too cold, like stepping into a walk-in freezer. My breath came out in visible puffs, and I could already feel the chill seeping through my clothes. The blue light pulsed more weakly now, and I could see that frost wasn't just forming on the surfaces, it was spreading, growing in crystalline patterns that looked almost intentional, like the craft itself was freezing from the inside out. The being watched me approach, those enormous black eyes following my every movement. Up close, I could see more details that my mind struggled to process. The skin was smooth, almost waxy, with a subtle texture I couldn't quite describe. Not scales, not quite pores, something in between. The hands had long, delicate fingers. 4 fingers, I noted, not 5, with no visible nails or knuckles the way humans had them. The joints seemed to bend in ways that suggested a different skeletal structure entirely. The being wore something that might have been clothing, or might have been part of its body. A form-fitting gray suit, or perhaps a second skin that covered everything except the head and hands. Where the suit was damaged on the left side, I could see something underneath that might have been tissue, or might have been circuitry, or might have been both. The line between biological and technological seemed blurred in ways I couldn't comprehend. I knelt beside it, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Can you move? Can you walk if I help you?" Weak, locomotive systems compromised, internal injuries from impact. This vessel is failing. I am failing. Then I'll carry you. There's got to be something I can do. Maybe if I can get you somewhere warmer, somewhere with... The being's hand moved slightly, fingers extending toward me, and what I somehow understood was a gesture asking me to stop, to listen. I fell silent. "Please, listen. There is no reversal of this condition. The cascade has begun. When hull integrity was lost, when your atmosphere entered, when temperature dropped below tolerance levels, the biological processes began shutting down. It is irreversible. I have perhaps hours, perhaps less." "How can you be so calm about this?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. The absurdity of the situation hadn't escaped me. Here I was, having a conversation in my head with a dying alien, worried about its emotional state. Calm? No. But accepting. I knew the risks when I took this assignment. Observation of developing species always carries danger, especially species as volatile as yours. Your world has claimed others of my kind before. I am not the first to fall here. Others? There have been others? Yes, over centuries. Most successfully hidden, their vessels recovered by my people before discovery. Some, not so fortunate. But this is not important now. What is important, what I must tell you before consciousness fades, is what I have learned, what I was sent to learn, about your species, about humanity. I settled into a more comfortable position on the cold floor of the craft, one hand still unconsciously reaching out toward the being in a gesture of comfort or connection. "You said you've been observing us for 78 years? "Yes, since 1919. "I was young then, 23 years and you're counting. Now I am 101, old for my species, but not impossibly so. We live longer than humans, but not infinitely, and I have spent most of my adult existence watching your world. Why? Why Earth? Why us? The being's chest moved in what might have been an attempt at a deeper breath. The mental voice continued, each word clearly taking effort. Because you are at a critical juncture, a dangerous transition point that all intelligent species must navigate, the bridge between planetary consciousness and cosmic awareness, between tribal warfare and unified civilization, between self-destruction and transcendence. Most species fail this transition. The evidence of their failure is written across the galaxy in dead worlds and silent radio frequencies. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. And you think we might fail too? I was sent to assess probability, to observe, to document, to analyze, to determine if humanity has the potential to survive its own adolescence. My findings were to be reported. But now I can only share them with you, one human, one witness, and hope that somehow it matters. It matters, I said firmly, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. Whatever you've learned, whatever you want to tell me, I'll listen, I'll remember, I promise. Those enormous eyes seemed to hold something like gratitude. The being's hand moved again, and this time I understood the gesture. I reached out and took the hand carefully. It was cool to the touch, smooth, with that same waxy texture as the rest of the skin. The fingers wrapped around mine with surprising strength. Thank you, Bobby Whitaker. Your compassion is noted, is appreciated, is characteristic of the best of your species. And that is where I must begin. With the best of humanity. The grip on my hand tightened slightly, and I felt that same strange warmth I'd noticed before. Not physical warmth, but something else. A connection forming, a bridge between two minds, two consciousnesses that should have been completely alien to each other, but somehow weren't. I'm here, I said quietly. Take your time. Tell me everything. The blue light pulsed weakly around us, and for a moment there was silence except for the soft sounds of the forest outside, birds calling, wind in the trees, the normal rhythms of a Pacific Northwest morning, completely unaware that something profound and impossible was happening within this crashed vessel. I will start with a memory, the being began. April 16th, 1945. Your world war was ending. I was stationed above Europe, observing the final collapse of the German forces. My people had been watching that conflict closely. The first truly global war your species had waged, the first time you had developed weapons capable of ending your entire civilization. The atomic bomb, I said quietly. Yes. Though I did not witness those detonations, I was reassigned to the Pacific Theater later. But in April of '45, I was over a place called Bergen-Belsen. Do you know this name? I nodded slowly. A concentration camp, one of the places they liberated. Yes. I watched from above as your soldiers, British soldiers, entered that place. I watched them discover what had been done there, the atrocities, the systematic destruction of human life on an industrial scale. And I watched something else, something that changed how I understood your species. The being paused, and I could feel its consciousness reaching back through decades of memory, pulling up images and emotions that I couldn't quite see but could somehow sense through our connection. I watched your soldiers weep, hardened men who had been fighting for years, who had seen terrible things, who had killed and watched friends die. They wept, and then they began trying to help. They gave their own food to the survivors, knowing they themselves would go hungry. They gave their clothes, their blankets. They risked disease and exhaustion to care for people who were strangers to them, who spoke different languages, who came from different cultures. They did this not because they were ordered to, but because they could not do otherwise. I sat quietly, listening, feeling the weight of that observation. I had seen your species wage war with terrible efficiency. I had watched cities burn, had observed the casualty counts climbing into millions. Your capacity for organized violence is extraordinary, terrifying even. But in that moment, watching those soldiers at Bergen-Belsen, I saw something equally extraordinary, the capacity for compassion that transcends tribal boundaries, the instinct to help, to heal, to care for suffering, even when there is no benefit to oneself. But we created that suffering in the first place, I said. Humans built those camps. Humans committed those atrocities. Yes, and that is the paradox of your species, the same capacity for empathy that drives one human to risk everything to save a stranger, coexists with the capacity for cruelty that drives another human to inflict systematic torture. You are capable of extraordinary good and extraordinary evil, often simultaneously, sometimes within the same individual. The being's breathing became more labored, and I noticed the blue light was pulsing even more weakly than before. The frost on the walls had spread, now covering almost every surface. The temperature seemed to be dropping further. Are you okay? Do you need to rest? No rest. Little time must continue. You must understand, this paradox is not a flaw. It is your defining characteristic, and it is what makes your species' future so uncertain. I don't understand. Let me show you another memory. August 6, 1945. I was reassigned to Japan by then. I was in orbit above Hiroshima when your B-29 dropped the first atomic weapon used in warfare. I felt my stomach tighten. You saw it? The bomb? I saw everything. The flash, the fireball, the mushroom cloud rising into the atmosphere, the city ceasing to exist in seconds. I recorded it all, transmitted the data back to my people, and I thought, surely this is the end. Surely your species has now developed the capacity to destroy itself, and surely you will use it. But we didn't. We haven't. Not yet. But you came close, so many times. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. I watched your world teeter on the edge of nuclear war for 13 days. I watched your leaders, your military commanders, your citizens, all balancing between the impulse toward violence and the desperate hope for peace. In the end, cooler heads prevailed, barely, by the smallest margins. The being's grip on my hand loosened slightly, then tightened again, as if it was struggling to maintain the physical connection. I have observed your species through so many moments of choice. The Berlin airlift in 1948, your former enemies feeding your former allies, choosing compassion over revenge. The civil rights movement in your country, millions of people choosing justice over convenience, often at great personal cost. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. I watched that, Bobby Whitaker. I watched humans who had been enemies for decades embrace each other, weep together, celebrate their common humanity. But you've also seen the other side, I said quietly. Vietnam, Rwanda, Yugoslavia. The wars never seem to stop. No, they do not. And that is what my people debate endlessly. Are you a species that will transcend your violent origins? Or are you condemned to destroy yourselves before you reach your potential? I have spent 78 years trying to answer that question. And what's your answer? The being was quiet for a long moment. The blue light pulsed once, twice, then held steady at a dimmer level. When the mental voice returned, it was even weaker than before. I do not know. That is the truth. I have seen such capacity for growth, for change, for evolution beyond your base instincts. I have watched your technology advance from propeller aircraft to spacecraft in a single human lifetime. I have watched your understanding of the universe expand exponentially. I have watched individuals choose mercy when revenge would be easier, choose truth when lies would be more convenient, choose sacrifice when selfishness would be more comfortable. But I have also watched you repeat the same patterns of violence across generations. I have watched you invent new technologies and immediately weaponize them. I have watched you discover the universe is vast and full of wonders, and then turn your attention back to tribal conflicts over resources and ideology. You stand at the edge of becoming something remarkable, a unified species capable of reaching beyond your planet, of joining the cosmic community, but you also stand at the edge of collapse. Environmental destruction, nuclear capability, resource wars, all threatening to end your civilization before it truly begins. I sat with that for a moment, watching the frost patterns spread across the hull interior, feeling the cold seeping deeper into my bones. Outside, I could hear a raven calling somewhere in the trees, completely oblivious to this conversation about the fate of our entire species. So what determines it? I asked. What determines whether we make it or not? Choice, individual choice. That is what I have learned in 78 years. The fate of your species will not be decided by governments or armies or corporations. It will be decided by billions of individual humans, making billions of individual choices every day. The choice to be kind instead of cruel, to tell truth instead of lies, to think beyond yourself, beyond your tribe, beyond your nation, to see all humans as one species sharing one world. That's a lot to ask. Yes, it is everything to ask. And yet, I have seen it happen. I have seen it in those soldiers at Bergen-Belsen. I have seen it in the scientists who created the polio vaccine and gave it freely to the world instead of patenting it for profit. I have seen it in the strangers who pull each other from burning cars on your highways. I have seen it in teachers who spend their own money to help students, in parents who sacrifice everything for children, in people who rescue animals, who protect forests, who fight for justice, knowing they may never see the results. The being paused, and I felt something flow through our connected hands, not just information, but emotion. Something that felt like hope mixed with despair, admiration mixed with fear. The capacity is there, Bobby Whitaker. The potential exists within your species to become something remarkable, to evolve beyond your violent origins, to create a civilization based on cooperation instead of competition, on shared prosperity instead of hoarded wealth, on unified purpose instead of tribal conflict. I have seen glimpses of that possible future in your best moments, but we're not there yet. No, you are not. And time is running out. The challenges you face are accelerating. Climate change. You are altering your planet's atmosphere faster than you seem to realize. Nuclear proliferation. More nations gaining weapons that could end civilization. Resource depletion. Fighting over what remains instead of learning to share and sustain. Technological advancement without ethical advancement. Creating capabilities without wisdom to use them responsibly. I felt the weight of it settling on me, the enormity of what this being was describing, the fate of our entire species hanging in the balance, dependent on choices we hadn't even recognized we needed to make. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "I'm nobody, just a forest ranger in a small town in Washington. What am I supposed to do with this information?" The being's eyes seemed to focus on me more intently, and I felt its consciousness pressing into mine with greater urgency. Because someone must know, someone must understand, someone must carry this knowledge forward. I was meant to return to my people with this assessment, these observations, these conclusions, but I will not return. So you must remember, you must carry it. You must share it if you can, or simply hold it if you cannot. But someone must know that humanity was seen, was observed, was evaluated, and was found to be both capable of greatness and teetering on the edge of failure. That's not much of an answer. No. But it is the only answer I have, the only answer anyone has. Your species' future is not written. It is being written right now by every choice every human makes. And all I can do, all anyone can do, is witness that process and hope that enough of you choose wisely. The blue light flickered, dimmed further. The being's grip on my hand was noticeably weaker now. I could see frost forming on its skin, crystalline patterns spreading across the gray surface. "You're getting worse," I said, stating the obvious. "How much time do you have left?" not much, perhaps an hour, perhaps less. But there is more I must tell you, more you must understand, about what I have observed, about the specific challenges ahead, about the choice your species faces in the coming years. Will you continue to listen? Yes, I said without hesitation. I'll stay as long as you need me. I'll listen to everything. Good. Then let me tell you about your most dangerous quality, the one that will likely determine whether humanity survives or perishes. Let me tell you about your capacity for self-deception. Self-deception, the being repeated in my mind, its mental voice growing fainter but still clear. Of all the traits I have observed in humanity over 78 years, this is perhaps the most dangerous. Not your capacity for violence. Many species are violent. Not your tribalism. That, too, is common among developing civilizations. But your ability to know the truth and choose to believe otherwise. That is what may destroy you. I don't understand, I said, shifting my position slightly on the cold floor. My legs were going numb from the temperature, but I wasn't about to leave. Are you talking about lying? No. Lying is conscious deception of others. Self-deception is unconscious deception of oneself. It is believing something false because believing the truth would be uncomfortable, inconvenient, or frightening. Your species has elevated this to an art form. The being's hand tightened on mine, and through our connection I felt images flowing. Not quite memories, but impressions, examples drawn from decades of observation. Let me give you context. In 1988, your scientist James Hansen testified before your Congress about climate change. He presented data, evidence, projections. He warned that your planet was warming due to human activity and that action was needed immediately to prevent catastrophic consequences. This was not speculation. This was scientific consensus based on decades of research. I remember hearing about that, I said. It was in the news. Yes. And what happened? Your species, particularly your political leaders, your industrial powers, chose to debate whether the science was real. Not how to address it, not how to solve it, but whether it existed at all. They funded studies to create doubt. They hired experts to confuse the public. They prioritized short-term economic comfort over long-term survival. This is self-deception on a civilizational scale. I felt defensive suddenly, though I wasn't sure why. But a lot of people do believe it. There are movements, environmental groups, people trying to make changes. Yes. And they are outnumbered by those who find it more comfortable to believe otherwise, or who acknowledge it intellectually but make no changes to their behavior because the threat feels distant, abstract. This is also self-deception, knowing something is true but acting as if it is not. The being paused, its breathing becoming more labored. I noticed the blue light was now barely pulsing, holding at a dim, steady glow that cast everything in eerie shadows. I watched this same pattern with your nuclear weapons. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, your species understood, truly understood, that you now possessed the power to end human civilization. Your scientists, your leaders, your citizens all knew this. And yet you built more weapons, thousands of them, tens of thousands, enough to destroy your world many times over. You had the knowledge that this was insane, but you did it anyway because each side found it more comfortable to believe they needed just a few more weapons for security. The Cold War, mutually assured destruction. Yes, a philosophy that assumed rational actors would never use weapons because using them would guarantee mutual annihilation. But it ignored human error, human emotion, technical malfunction, miscommunication. You came within minutes of nuclear war multiple times. In 1983, your Soviet early warning systems detected incoming missiles, false alarm, technical error. And one man, Stanislav Petrov, chose not to report it up the chain of command because his instinct told him it was wrong. One man's choice prevented potential nuclear war. You bet your entire species' survival on such razor-thin margins, all while telling yourselves you were being rational and responsible. I sat with that, feeling the cold seeping deeper into my bones, thinking about how close we'd apparently come to destroying everything. So you're saying we lie to ourselves to feel better? To avoid dealing with hard truths? Sometimes. But it is more complex than simple comfort-seeking. Your self-deception often serves to protect your identity, your worldview, your sense of rightness. I have watched this in your political systems especially. Humans will cling to beliefs that are demonstrably false, if admitting they are false would mean admitting they were wrong, that their group was wrong, that their identity was built on incorrect foundations. The being shifted slightly, wincing with what I interpreted as pain. I squeezed its hand gently, offering what small comfort I could. I observed your presidential election last year, 1996, Clinton versus Dole. And what struck me most was not the policies or the candidates, but how your citizens consumed information. They watched news sources that confirmed what they already believed. They dismissed information that challenged their views as biased or false. They sorted themselves into tribes that reinforced their existing beliefs rather than challenged them. That's just how politics works, I said weakly. Yes. And that is the problem. Your mechanisms for determining truth, your news media, your political discourse, your public debates, have been corrupted by the human need to be right rather than to be accurate. You have created systems that profit from confirming people's biases rather than challenging them. This accelerates self-deception. It makes it easier, more comfortable, more socially rewarding to believe comforting lies than uncomfortable truths. I thought about my own life in Packwood, about conversations at the Mountain Goat Diner, about how people talked about politics and news and the world, how everyone seemed to have their own version of reality, their own set of facts, and how rarely anyone seemed willing to really question their own beliefs. So what's the solution? How do we stop deceiving ourselves? That is the question I cannot answer, because the solution requires something extraordinarily difficult. It requires humans to value truth over comfort, accuracy over validation, growth over certainty. It requires you to constantly question your own beliefs, to seek out information that challenges rather than confirms, to be willing to admit when you are wrong. This goes against your psychological wiring. Your brains evolved to form quick judgments and stick with them because in your ancestral environment, hesitation meant being eaten by predators. But in your modern world, that same instinct leads to rigidity, tribalism, inability to adapt. The being coughed, an actual physical sound, raspy and concerning. Its chest heaved, and for a moment I thought it might be fading faster than expected. But after a few seconds, it stabilized, and the mental voice returned, weaker but determined. Let me give you another example. Your economic system. I have watched capitalism evolve on your planet, watched it create unprecedented prosperity for some humans while leaving billions in poverty. And I have watched as your species tells itself stories about this, that poverty is deserved, that wealth is earned, that the system is fundamentally fair. You have enormous evidence that this is not true, that circumstances of birth, systemic racism, historical exploitation, pure luck, all play massive roles in outcomes. But acknowledging this fully would require restructuring your entire economic system, admitting that much of your prosperity is built on injustice. So instead, you engage in collective self-deception. You tell yourselves stories that let you keep what you have without feeling guilty about how you got it. That's a pretty harsh assessment, I said, feeling that defensiveness again. Yes, truth often is harsh. But consider, I have watched your wealthiest humans accumulate more resources than they could use in 1,000 lifetimes, while children starve in your streets, not in distant countries, in your own cities. And your society treats this as normal, as acceptable, as just the way things are. You have normalized obscene inequality through self-deception. You tell yourselves that those who have less somehow deserve less, that those who have more somehow earned more, even when the evidence shows this is largely false. But people do work hard. Some people work harder than others. Yes. And I have observed that the humans who work hardest, your farmers, your factory workers, your caregivers, are often the least compensated. While those who manipulate financial systems, who were born into wealth, who exploit others' labor, they are often the most compensated. Your economic system does not actually reward hard work. It rewards capital, inheritance, exploitation, luck. But admitting this would mean admitting the system is unjust. So instead, you deceive yourselves. You create elaborate justifications. You blame the poor for their poverty and credit the rich for their wealth, regardless of the actual mechanisms that created these outcomes. I wanted to argue, to defend the American dream, the idea that anyone could make it if they worked hard enough. But sitting there in that freezing alien craft, holding the hand of a dying being from another world, the arguments felt hollow. How many people in Packwood worked their entire lives and barely scraped by? How many of my classmates from high school had been just as smart, just as hardworking as me, but had been born into circumstances that limited their options? Okay, I said finally, I see your point. We tell ourselves stories that make us feel better about inequality. But what does this have to do with whether we survive as a species? Everything. Because the same self-deception that lets you ignore inequality also lets you ignore climate change. The same mental patterns that let you believe poverty is deserved also let you believe environmental destruction is acceptable. The same psychological mechanisms that let you maintain an unjust economic system also let you maintain a suicidal energy policy. It is all connected. It is all the same fundamental flaw, the inability or unwillingness to face uncomfortable truths and make necessary changes. The being's grip on my hand weakened noticeably, and I could see that the frost had now spread to its skin, delicate patterns of ice forming on the gray surface. The blue light flickered once, twice. "You need to rest," I said. "Save your energy." "No, little time remains. Must tell you more. You must understand the full scope. The self-deception is bad enough on its own. But there is something worse, something I have observed accelerating in recent years. Your technology is advancing faster than your wisdom, and this may be what ends you." "What do you mean? Consider the tools you have created in just the last 50 years. Nuclear weapons, as I mentioned, but also genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, weapons of increasing precision and devastation. Each new capability you develop creates new ways you could destroy yourselves. And each time you tell yourselves you will use these tools responsibly, even as evidence accumulates that you will not. I thought about news stories I'd seen, articles I'd read, cloning research, computer systems getting smarter, military technology becoming more advanced. But we have regulations, safety measures, ethics committees. Yes, and I have watched those protections erode when profit or power is at stake. I have watched your militaries weaponize every technology they encounter. I have watched your corporations prioritize profit over safety time and again. I have watched your scientists, well-meaning though many are, pursue knowledge without adequate consideration of consequences. You are children playing with loaded weapons, telling yourselves you are being careful even as the evidence shows otherwise. That's a terrifying way to put it. Yes, because it is terrifying. Your species is at a critical point. You have developed the capability to reshape your world, to manipulate life at its most fundamental levels, to create intelligence beyond your own, to destroy your entire planet multiple times over. But you have not developed the wisdom to wield these capabilities responsibly. You have the tools of gods in the hands of adolescents. And adolescents, as you know, often make catastrophically poor decisions because they believe they are invincible. The being coughed again, more violently this time. The blue light dimmed further, barely visible now. I could feel through our connection that its life force was fading, that the biological systems that sustained it were shutting down one by one. "Please," I said, tears forming in my eyes, though I couldn't explain exactly why. "Please rest. We can continue this later." There is no later for me, Bobby Whitaker. Only now. Only these final hours to share what I have learned, what your species desperately needs to understand. Let me continue. Please? I nodded, squeezing the cold hand gently. Okay, I'm listening. Tell me everything. Good. Because there is one more thing you must understand. The most important thing. The thing that will determine whether humanity survives the next 100 years. What is it? The being's enormous black eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made me feel like it was looking through me, into me, seeing every part of my soul. Choice, individual choice, that is what everything comes down to. Not governments, not corporations, not leaders or movements or institutions. Individual humans making individual choices billions of times per day. That is what will determine your fate. Individual choice, the being repeated, its mental voice barely a whisper now in my consciousness. This is what my people have debated for centuries. When observing developing species, we ask, does collective destiny override individual will? Or do individual choices accumulate to create collective destiny? After 78 years watching humanity, I have my answer. For your species, individual choice is everything. But one person can't change the world, I said, though even as I spoke the words, they felt hollow. We're just people living our lives. What can one person really do against governments and corporations and massive systems? The being's hand tightened on mine with surprising strength, given how weak it had become. Through our connection, I felt something like urgency, like it needed me to understand this above all else. That belief that one person cannot make a difference is perhaps the most destructive lie your species tells itself. Let me show you why it is false. Images flooded into my mind, not quite memories, but impressions drawn from the aliens' vast store of observations. I saw moments, people, choices that had rippled across history. October 27, 1962, Cuban Missile Crisis. A Soviet submarine, B-59, is being depth-charged by American destroyers. The submarine's captain believes war has begun. He wants to launch a nuclear torpedo. Soviet protocol requires unanimous agreement from 3 officers to launch. 2 agree. One man, Vasily Arkhipov, refuses. One man's choice, that is all. And because of that one choice, nuclear war is averted. Millions, perhaps billions, of lives are saved because one person chose differently. I felt the weight of that moment, imagined being that officer, under pressure, believing war had started, having to make that choice. That is not unique. That is representative. I have watched your history. Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat on a bus, one choice that catalyzes a movement. Oskar Schindler choosing to save Jews during your Holocaust, one choice that saves over 1,000 lives and inspires countless others. Hugh Thompson, a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, landing his aircraft between American soldiers and Vietnamese civilians at My Lai, threatening to shoot his own countrymen if they continue to massacre. One choice that stops atrocity and eventually exposes it to the world. But those are exceptional people in exceptional circumstances, I protested. No, they are ordinary people who made extraordinary choices when circumstances demanded it. That is my point. Every human has this capacity. Every human faces moments, smaller, perhaps less dramatic, but no less real, where their choice matters, where their choice creates ripples that affect others, that affect the future. The being coughed again, its body shaking with the effort. I could see the frost had now covered most of its skin, crystalline patterns that looked almost beautiful, but signaled deteriorating systems, failing biology. Please, I said again, you're getting worse. Maybe if we... No. Must finish. Must make you understand. Bobby Whitaker, you think you are nobody. Forest ranger in small town, divorced, alone. What difference can you make? But you are wrong. Every day you make choices that matter. Like what? I check trails, I help lost hikers, I file reports. Yes. And in doing so, you protect wilderness, you preserve spaces that will be critical for your planet's ecological balance as climate change accelerates. You help people, sometimes save people, when they are lost or injured. You do work that matters, even if it seems small, but more than that, every interaction you have with other humans is a choice. To be kind or cruel, to tell truth or lie, to help or ignore, to connect or isolate. These choices accumulate. They create who you are, and they affect everyone around you. I thought about my life in Packwood, the small interactions at the Mountain Goat Diner, helping tourists find trailheads, training new rangers. Were those really significant? Did they actually matter in the grand scheme of things? Let me tell you what I have observed about your species. You are not separate individuals. You are deeply interconnected, even when you feel alone. Every choice you make sends ripples through your social networks, your communities, your world. When you choose kindness, it makes kindness more likely in others. When you choose cruelty, it normalizes cruelty. When you choose courage, it inspires courage. When you choose cowardice, it reinforces cowardice. You are constantly shaping each other through your choices. But that still doesn't change the big things: climate change, nuclear weapons, inequality. Those require governments to act, don't they? And who are governments made of? Individuals. Individuals who make choices based partly on what their citizens demand, what their societies value, what their cultures normalize. If millions of individuals choose sustainability over convenience, governments respond. If millions choose justice over comfort, systems change. If millions choose truth over tribal loyalty, policies shift. The collective is made of individuals. Change the individuals, and you change the collective. The blue light flickered dangerously now, and I realized we were running out of time. The being seemed to sense my concern. Yes, fading now. But must tell you the most important part. About your immediate future, about the choice your species faces right now in 1997, in the coming years. A critical juncture that will determine everything. What choice? What juncture? Your technology, your internet. I have been watching it develop. ARPANET in 1969, World Wide Web in 1989, commercial internet in 1991. Now, 1997, it is spreading rapidly, growing, connecting your world in unprecedented ways. This is the critical moment. Because this technology, this global instant communication system, can be one of two things. It can be a tool for connection, education, shared truth, collective problem solving, or it can be a tool for division, manipulation, false information, tribal warfare. Which it becomes is up to individual choices. I thought about the internet. I'd used it a few times at the Forest Service office in Packwood, mostly for email, looking up weather data, occasional research. It seemed like a useful tool, nothing more. You do not see it yet. But I have observed the pattern. Technology that connects people can either unite them or divide them, depending on how it is used. Your television did this. It could have been educational, enlightening, democratizing. Instead, it became primarily commercial, entertaining, tribally divisive. Your internet is more powerful by orders of magnitude. If humanity uses it wisely for education, for sharing accurate information, for connecting people across cultures and borders, it could accelerate your evolution toward unified global consciousness. But if you use it as you use television, for profit, for manipulation, for confirming biases and dividing tribes, it will accelerate your fragmentation and self-destruction. That seems like a stretch. It's just a communication tool. Yes. And nuclear fission is just a physical process. But what you do with it, power plants, or weapons makes all the difference. The internet will be the same. I have seen enough of human behavior to predict both possibilities. In one future, humans use global connectivity to solve global problems. You share knowledge freely, connect across borders, build empathy through understanding other cultures, coordinate responses to climate change and disease and poverty. In another future, you use it to retreat into tribal echo chambers, to spread false information, to manipulate each other, to weaponize data, to increase division and hatred. Both futures are possible. Which one manifests depends on millions of individual choices about how to use this tool. The being's breathing had become irregular, raspy. Its grip on my hand was barely perceptible now. I could feel through our connection that it was struggling to maintain consciousness, fighting to share these final observations. How do we make sure we use it right? How do we choose the better path? The same way you make any choice right, intentionally, thoughtfully, with awareness of consequences. Every time you use this technology, you choose. Do you seek truth or confirmation? Do you connect with those different from you or only those similar? Do you spread accurate information or appealing lies? Do you use it to learn and grow or to judge and attack? Each choice seems small, but millions of humans making millions of choices, that creates the collective reality. I sat with that, feeling the cold seeping through my entire body now, barely able to feel my legs. Outside, I could hear the forest sounds continuing, wind in the trees, birds calling, the normal rhythms of a Pacific Northwest morning. Inside this craft, a being from another world was dying, using its final moments to share observations about my species. Why does it matter to you? I asked quietly. Why do you care so much what happens to us? You're not human, we're not your people. Why spend 78 years watching us, worrying about us? For the first time since we'd started talking, I felt something like emotion come through our connection. Not quite human emotion. It had a different flavor, a different texture, but recognizable nonetheless. Something like affection mixed with sadness, hope mixed with fear. Because consciousness is precious, rare, worth preserving. In all my travels, all my observations across worlds, I have encountered only 3 species, including your own, that achieved your level of intelligence, creativity, emotional depth. Most life in the universe is simple. Bacteria, plants, animals with limited awareness. True consciousness, the ability to reflect on existence, to create art and music and philosophy, to question and wonder and dream, this is extraordinary. And when it exists, it should be preserved. But you said most species at our level of development destroy themselves. Yes, most fail the transition. They develop the tools to end themselves before developing the wisdom to avoid using those tools. But some succeed, some make it through, some evolve into something remarkable, and the universe is richer for their existence. I want humanity to be one of the successes. After 78 years watching you, I have grown attached. I have seen your potential. I have witnessed your best moments. I want you to survive, to thrive, to become what you could be. Tears were streaming down my face now, though I couldn't entirely explain why. This being, this alien creature from a world I couldn't imagine, cared about humanity, had spent most of its life watching us, hoping for us, rooting for us to succeed. I wish I could do more, I said, my voice breaking. I wish I could save you. I wish you could report back to your people, tell them what you've learned. You are saving me, in a way, by listening, by understanding, by carrying this knowledge forward. I will not return to my people, but you will return to yours. And maybe, what I have shared will matter. Maybe you will make different choices because of this conversation. Maybe those choices will ripple outward. Maybe that will be enough. The being's eyes were starting to cloud over, the black depths becoming less clear. The blue light was almost gone now, just the faintest glow remaining. The temperature in the craft seemed to have dropped even further, and I was shivering uncontrollably. "What should I do?" I asked desperately. "After you're gone, what should I do with all this information?" "Live. Choose well. When you return to your small town, to your ranger work, to your ordinary life, make it extraordinary through your choices. Be kind when you could be indifferent. Be brave when you could be safe. Be honest when you could be convenient. Be connected when you could be isolated. Every day, in small ways, choose the better path. That is all any individual can do. That is all any individual needs to do, because if enough individuals do it, the collective transforms. That doesn't feel like enough. Not after everything you've told me. It is everything. That is what you must understand. Grand gestures are rare. Heroic moments are exceptional. But ordinary choices happen constantly, and it is the accumulation of ordinary choices that determines extraordinary outcomes. You do not need to be Rosa Parks or Vasily Arkhipov or Hugh Thompson. You only need to be Bobby Whitaker, making good choices every day. That is enough. That is everything. The being's hand slipped from mine, too weak to maintain the grip. Its breathing was now barely perceptible, shallow and irregular. I took its hand again, held it gently, trying to offer whatever comfort I could to a dying being from another world. "I promise," I said through my tears, "I promise I'll remember. I'll try to make the right choices. I'll try to make your 78 years of watching us mean something. Thank you. That is all I can ask. That is more than I hoped for. You are a good representation of your species' best qualities, Bobby Whitaker. Compassion, curiosity, willingness to listen, capacity for growth. If more humans were like you, your species would have no doubt of survival. There are millions like me, billions probably. We're just ordinary people trying to live decent lives. Yes, and that is what gives me hope. Even now, even as I fade, the extraordinary potential within ordinary humans, the capacity for goodness that exists everywhere, waiting to be activated by choice. If your species can tap into that, if enough individuals choose wisely, you will not only survive, you will flourish." The blue light went out completely. The craft was dark except for the dim daylight filtering through the crack in the hull. The being's breathing became even more shallow, and I knew we were down to minutes now, not hours. "Is there anything else?" I asked. "Anything else you need to tell me? Anything I can do for you?" The mental voice came one last time, so faint I almost couldn't distinguish it from my own thoughts. "Remember me. Remember that you were not alone in the universe. Remember that someone watched and hoped and believed in humanity's potential even when you doubted yourselves. Remember that every choice matters. Every kindness ripples outward. Every truth spoken strengthens the foundation. Every connection made reduces isolation. Remember and choose well." I sat with the being for another 20 minutes after it stopped speaking. Its breathing grew slower, shallower, until finally it simply stopped. There was no dramatic moment, no final gasp, no light leaving its eyes. It just quietly faded like a candle, burning down to nothing. The enormous black eyes remained open, staring upward at the frost-covered ceiling of the craft, but there was no consciousness behind them anymore. I continued holding its hand for a long time after, unable to let go, unable to accept that this impossible encounter was over. My mind kept replaying everything it had told me about humanity's paradoxes, our capacity for self-deception, our dangerous adolescence with powerful technologies, the critical importance of individual choices. 78 years of observation distilled into a few hours of conversation, now residing solely in my memory. Eventually, the cold forced me to move. I was shivering violently, my fingers numb, my legs barely functional. I carefully laid the being's hand across its chest in what seemed like a respectful position, though I had no idea if that gesture meant anything to its species. Then I backed out of the craft, squeezing through that crack in the hull one last time, emerging into the forest that suddenly seemed impossibly bright and warm compared to the freezing darkness inside. I stood in the clearing, looking at the damaged craft, trying to process what had just happened. I had found a crashed alien vessel. I had spoken with an extraterrestrial being. I had been entrusted with observations about humanity spanning nearly 8 decades. And now that being was gone, and I was the only person on Earth who knew any of it had happened. My radio crackled. "Whitaker, this is Base. You missed your 15-minute check-in. Everything okay out there?" I pulled out the radio, stared at it for a moment, then pressed the talk button. "Base, this is Whitaker. Sorry about that. Everything's fine. Just got distracted documenting some unusual tree damage. Heading back to the trail now." "Copy that. See you when you get back." I clipped the radio back to my belt, took one last look at the craft, and made a decision. I couldn't report this. Couldn't tell anyone. If I did, this forest would be overrun within hours. Military, scientists, government agents, media. They'd tear apart this peaceful clearing, dissect the being's body, study the craft, and probably classify everything so thoroughly that the knowledge would disappear into some classified vault, unavailable to the very humanity the being had spent its life observing. No, this would remain secret, at least for now, maybe forever. I pulled out my GPS unit and marked the location, then took several photographs with my Nikon, the craft from different angles, the surrounding forest, the damage to the trees. Evidence, if I ever needed it. Then I hiked back to the trail and continued my day as if nothing extraordinary had happened, checking trail markers and bridges with a mind that was a million miles away. When I finally returned to my truck that afternoon, I sat in the driver's seat for a long time before starting the engine, just staring out at the forest. Everything looked the same, the trees, the mountains, the gray Washington sky, but I felt fundamentally changed, like I'd been seeing the world in 2 dimensions my whole life and had suddenly gained the ability to see 3. I drove back to Packwood slowly, watching the familiar scenery roll by with new eyes. The small houses scattered along the highway, the gas station where I always filled up, the general store with its hand-painted sign, the Mountain Goat Diner where Betty would be serving the dinner crowd. These places, these people, they were all part of something larger than I'd understood, part of a species teetering on the edge of either greatness or destruction, and every one of them making choices every day that pushed us incrementally toward one outcome or the other. When I pulled into town, it was nearly 6 p.m. I parked in front of my small house and sat there for another few minutes, trying to decide what to do. Should I go inside and pretend everything was normal? Should I drive back out to the crash site? Should I tell someone, anyone, what I'd experienced? In the end, I went to the Mountain Goat. I needed to be around people, needed to observe them with this new perspective the being had given me. The diner was about half full when I walked in, the usual Friday evening crowd. Loggers from the mill, a few families with kids, some tourists passing through on their way to the mountain. Betty looked up from behind the counter when I entered. "Bobby, haven't seen you in almost a week. You've been hiding out in the woods again?" "Something like that," I said, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "Just the usual. Burger and coffee." "You got it, hun," team. She poured me coffee from the pot she always kept brewing. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Long day," I said, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "Just tired." But I wasn't tired. I was awake in a way I'd never been before. I watched the people around me with new awareness. The family at the corner booth, parents with 2 young kids, maybe 7 and 9. The father was patient, helping his daughter with her menu, explaining what different items were. The mother was laughing at something the younger child said. Small moments of kindness, of connection, of choosing to be present and engaged rather than distracted or dismissive. Were these the kinds of individual choices the being had meant? Did these small acts of parenting actually matter in the grand scheme of species survival? At another table, 2 men were having an animated discussion about something political. I couldn't hear the details, but I could see the body language. Tense, defensive, neither really listening to the other, both just waiting for their turn to talk. The kind of conversation the being had warned about, tribal, reinforcing existing beliefs rather than seeking truth, more interested in being right than being accurate. Behind the counter, Betty was training a new waitress, a young woman who'd recently moved to Packwood from somewhere down south. I watched Betty patiently explain the ordering system, how to work the coffee machine, where everything was stored. Kindness to a stranger. Teaching. Helping someone new to the community feel welcomed. Another small choice that probably felt insignificant to Betty, but was part of the fabric of human connection. "Here you go, Bobby." Betty set my burger down in front of me. "You sure you're all right? You're being awful quiet." "Just thinking," I said. "Betty, can I ask you something?" "Sure, hon. What's on your mind?" "Do you think one person can make a difference? Like, really make a difference in the world?" She looked at me with surprise, then considered the question seriously. "Well, I don't know about changing the whole world, but I figure we can make a difference to the people around us. Like this girl, I'm training..." She gestured to the new waitress. She needed a job, needed to feel welcome in a new place. If I can help with that, that's something, isn't it? And maybe she helps someone else someday, and they help someone else. I guess it all adds up. I felt tears prick my eyes unexpectedly. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Yeah, I think you're right. I think it does all add up." Betty patted my hand. "You eat your burger, and if you need to talk about whatever's bothering you, I'm here." I ate slowly, listening to the conversations around me, watching people interact. Some chose kindness. Some chose indifference. Some chose connection. Some chose isolation. But they were all choosing constantly, whether they realized it or not. And the being had been right. These choices accumulated. They created the culture, the community, the collective reality that we all lived in. Over the following days and weeks, I found myself unable to stop thinking about the conversation in that crashed craft. The being's words echoed in my mind constantly. Every interaction I had, every decision I made, I found myself pausing to consider, what choice am I making here? Am I choosing the path toward connection or division? Truth or comfortable lies? Courage or convenient safety? I went back to the crash site 3 days later, half expecting it to be gone. Maybe the being's people had retrieved it. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But it was still there, though something had changed. The blue light was completely gone, and the craft itself looked duller, less reflective, like it was slowly degrading. The being's body was still inside, unchanged by the cold, preserved by the same atmospheric incompatibility that had ended its life. I took more photographs, made detailed notes about everything I observed, documented the location precisely, not because I planned to share it, but because I needed to preserve the evidence. Needed to know it had really happened, that I hadn't lost my mind. Then I did something that felt right, even if I couldn't explain why. I gathered rocks from around the clearing, large stones heavy enough that they wouldn't be easily moved, and placed them around the crack in the hull, covering the opening, not sealing it completely but obscuring it, protecting it, creating a cairn of sorts, a marker that something significant had happened here, even if no one else would ever know what. Over the following months, I returned to the site regularly, sometimes weekly, sometimes just monthly, depending on my ranger duties and the weather. Each time, the craft seemed a little more degraded, a little less impossible, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. By winter, snow covered the clearing, and I couldn't visit again until spring. When I returned in April 1998, almost 6 months after the crash, the craft had deteriorated significantly. The hull material was breaking down, crumbling in places, being absorbed into the forest floor. The being's body was gone, whether taken by its people, decomposed through processes I didn't understand, or carried off by scavengers, I couldn't tell. Within another year, there was barely any evidence that anything unusual had ever been in that clearing. Just some odd discoloration in the soil, some rocks arranged in a pattern that might have been natural or might have been my cairn, slowly being scattered by weather and animals. But the impact of that October morning never faded. The being's observations, its warnings, its hopes for humanity, these remained vivid in my mind. And more importantly, they changed how I lived. I started making different choices, small ones mostly. When tourists asked for help, I gave them more time, more attention, more patience than I would have before. When I encountered lost hikers, I didn't just point them to the trail. I walked with them, talked with them, made sure they felt safe and connected, rather than just rescued and dismissed. I started attending town council meetings in Packwood, something I'd never done before. Started speaking up about environmental issues, about protecting the forests, about sustainable tourism, not grandstanding, not making speeches, just adding my voice as someone who knew these woods, who understood their value, who wanted them preserved for future generations. I started volunteering at the small library in Packwood, helping kids with reading programs, teaching them about the forest and wildlife, sharing knowledge, creating connection, choosing to engage with my community rather than isolating myself in my comfortable solitude. And I started being more intentional about truth. When I heard people spreading misinformation about the environment, about forest management, about anything I actually knew about, I spoke up, gently, respectfully, but firmly. Not trying to win arguments, just trying to share accurate information to counter the self-deception the being had warned about. Were these actions changing the world? Probably not. But they were changing my little corner of it. And I noticed something interesting. My choices seemed to ripple outward. The tourists I helped often came back, brought friends, became advocates for protecting these forests. The kids I worked with at the library grew more interested in nature, in science, in understanding their world. The people at town council meetings started thinking more about long-term impacts rather than just short-term convenience, small ripples, but ripples nonetheless. In the summer of 1999, nearly 2 years after the crash, I was training a new ranger, a young woman named Sarah Chen, fresh out of college, idealistic and passionate about conservation. We were hiking to check on a trail when she asked me why I'd become a ranger. I thought about that question for a while before answering. I used to think it was because I liked being alone, I said finally, liked the quiet, the solitude, the simplicity. But I've realized it's more than that. It's about stewardship, about taking care of something bigger than myself, about making choices that will matter long after I'm gone. That's a beautiful way to think about it, she said. Someone once told me, I said carefully, that every choice matters, every action ripples outward, that we're all connected in ways we don't fully understand, and that the future isn't predetermined, it's created by billions of individual choices every day. I think about that a lot. Who told you that? Sounds like a philosopher. I smiled. Someone very wise, someone who understood humanity better than most humans do. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, and I thought about the being in that crashed craft, about its 78 years of observation, about its final words to me about choice and hope and the extraordinary potential within ordinary humans. That evening, back at the ranger station, I pulled out a journal I'd started keeping since the crash. In it, I'd been documenting not the crash itself, that remained my secret, but the observations about humanity that the being had shared, the warnings about self-deception, the insights about individual choice, the hopes for our species' future. I'd been writing it all down, preserving it just in case someday I decided to share it, just in case the world needed to hear what a being from beyond our world had learned about us. I wrote a new entry that night. Trained Sarah Chen today. She reminds me why this work matters, why every choice to protect these forests, to educate people, to preserve what's beautiful and important, why all of it matters. The being was right. We don't need grand gestures. We need millions of people making good choices every day. Being one of those people is enough, is everything. Years passed. I continued my work as a ranger, continued living in Packwood, continued making the small daily choices that accumulated into a life I was proud of. I never told anyone about the crash, about the being, about our conversation. It remained mine alone, a secret I carried, a responsibility I took seriously. But the impact was real. I could see it in my own life, the connections I'd built, the people I'd helped, the small ways I'd made my corner of the world better. And I could see it in others, people whose lives I'd touched, who went on to touch others. Students I'd worked with who became teachers, scientists, advocates, tourists I'd helped who became conservationists, rangers I'd trained who brought that same intentionality to their work. Ripples, always ripples, spreading outward in ways I couldn't fully track but could sometimes glimpse. On October 17, 2007, exactly 10 years after the crash, I hiked back to that clearing one final time. I was 48 now, grayer, slower, feeling my age in my joints and back. The clearing looked like any other part of the forest. No evidence of the craft remained. Nature had completely reclaimed it. I stood there in the quiet, remembering those enormous black eyes, that mental voice in my head, the frost forming on gray skin, the conviction that humanity was worth hoping for, worth believing in, worth spending 78 years observing. I've tried, I said aloud to the empty forest. I've tried to make choices that would honor what you shared with me. I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if humanity will make it through the challenges ahead. But I've tried to be part of the solution rather than the problem. I've tried to remember that every choice matters. The forest was silent except for wind in the trees and the distant call of a raven. No response came, and I hadn't expected one. But I felt a sense of peace nonetheless, a sense that I'd kept my promise, that I'd carried forward the being's observations, its hopes, its faith in human potential, even if only in my own small actions. I turned and started the hike back, leaving the clearing to its peace, carrying with me the most important truth the being had shared, that we are not powerless, we are not predetermined, we are not doomed. We are choosing our future every day, every moment, every interaction. And if enough of us choose wisely, choose kindly, choose courageously, if enough of us make the transcendent choice more often than the instinctive one, then maybe, just maybe, we'll become the remarkable species that being believed we could be. As I walked back through the forest, I thought about all the humans making choices at that exact moment, some choosing kindness, some choosing cruelty, some choosing truth, some choosing comfortable lies. All of it accumulating, all of it mattering, all of it creating the future. And I thought about a being from beyond our world who'd spent most of its life watching us, hoping for us, believing in us, despite all our flaws and failures. We'll try, I said quietly to the forest, to the memory, to myself. We'll keep trying, that's all we can do, and maybe, that will be enough. The forest answered with wind in the trees, and I walked on, carrying my secret, carrying my promise, carrying the hope that humanity would prove worthy of the faith that dying being had placed in us, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one person at a time. It would have to be enough.